On April 2, 2025, all eyes were on the United States as President Trump held an event in the White House Rose Garden to announce global reciprocal tariffs. He declared April 2 as the United States Liberation Day. The most notable aspect was the 34% reciprocal tariff on China, an additional 34% on top of the existing tariff. In early February this year, the United States imposed an additional 10% tariff on all goods imported from China. 1 month later, the tariff rate doubled to 20%. This year, Trump has increased tariffs on China to 54%, which, combined with the 13% average tariff China faced before Trump's return to the White House, means that after China completes reciprocal tariffs, the total U.S. tariff on all goods imported from China will reach 67%. In addition, Trump formally signed an executive order to close the trade loophole allowing low-value packages from China to be shipped tax-free, known as the de minimis exemption. The order will officially take effect at 12:01 a.m. on May 2, 2025, Eastern Time. Before this, Chinese overseas e-commerce platforms like Temu and Shein exploited this de minimis loophole, shipping a large volume of low-value, tax-free packages from China and Hong Kong to the U.S. in small individual shipments. There is no doubt that this order will severely impact Chinese low-cost e-commerce platforms and small export factories. The most affected will be the infamous Yiwu International Trade City. A video uploaded on April 3rd shows the vast trade city nearly empty with few people in sight. The uploader commented, saying, "It's hard to do business. There's not a single foreigner in Yiwu." A blogger on X mentioned Yiwu's small commodity market, Shein, Temu, AliExpress, and Chinese-owned warehouses in the United States should all be ready for closures. In 2025, China's unemployment rate will likely continue to rise. Trump's latest move is much stronger than the previous 10% tariff. Goods entering the U.S. through small tax-free shipments amount to nearly $100 billion annually. Currently, China's economy is largely supported by foreign trade. Trump's move pulls the rug out from under it. The real target of the U.S.-Canada-Mexico tariff war is China. An article on a Chinese website recently described the current situation in the Yiwu small commodity market. The article mentions that in the spring of 2025, the Christmas lights in Yiwu came on early, but they failed to light up the worried faces of cross-border e-commerce traders. The Trump administration's tariff policy was like a bucket of cold water, dousing the enthusiasm for China-U.S. trade. Pinduoduo's stock price performed a bungee jump on the U.S. stock market, while businesses counted unsold goods in their warehouses. Meanwhile, American consumers hesitated to purchase Chinese goods due to rising prices. This trade war 2.0 has not only rewritten business rules, but also made the lives of ordinary people more uncertain. Pinduoduo's headquarters remains brightly lit, and employees are complaining that the boss is focused on the stock price curve, and his blood pressure is rising faster than the tariffs. The cries from Christmas light sellers in Yiwu are growing louder. American customers say they won't celebrate this year. The price of lights has risen even higher than Christmas trees. Data shows that 30% of Pinduoduo's Temu sellers rely on exports to the U.S. After tariffs surged by 60%, the return rate in the North American market skyrocketed to 35%. The boss of a Bluetooth earphone factory in Suzhou went viral with his complaint. "Customers want me to lower prices by 20% to share the tariff cost. Should I just sell myself on a second-hand website?" Tencent News revealed the harsh reality. 50,000 stores have given up, and the comment sections have turned into a disaster meeting. Daily sales of 1,000 units have dropped to monthly sales of 100 units, and unsold products are piling up in warehouses. The Shenzhen Cross-Border E-Commerce Association urgently held a meeting to discuss how to gracefully escape the tariff battlefield. Vietnam has become the new hot destination, but business owners are stunned to find that office rents in Hanoi are higher than in Shenzhen, and assembly line workers demand 2 days off a week. The ever-busy Guangzhou Shein village is finished. On X, netizens are discussing the situation. One person said, "Chinese cross-border e-commerce has received its death notice." Another said, "If China loses the U.S. market, its products will only be dumped in Europe. This will be a disaster for Europe too, and tariffs there will increase." Some believe the excess production can still be sold to the second and third world markets. However, regardless of whether these markets can handle it, China's existing production capacity will directly destroy the basic industries in these regions. The people in the second and third worlds aren't like those in Europe and the U.S. They will revolt. So it's inevitable that Chinese companies will cut production and lay off workers. One netizen from mainland China commented, "Thanks to Trump. The impact of Chinese e-commerce on domestic industries and employment is the most severe, but the Chinese authorities, for the sake of exports and political purposes, have made life unbearable for the people. Keep it up, Trump. And next, please go after the U.S. Communist Party members." In addition to exploiting the de minimis tax-free loophole, another significant way China has been evading U.S. tariffs is by shifting production to countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, and other Asian nations. However, these shipment countries are now also facing high tariffs, making it almost pointless to continue diversifying the supply chain to these countries. According to Bloomberg's estimate, imposing a 54% tariff on Chinese goods could lead to a 90% reduction in exports to the U.S. by 2030. Trump's tariffs may encourage China to strengthen trade with other markets, but currently no other country has a consumption capacity close to that of the U.S. So, what exactly is a reciprocal tariff? For example, if a country imposes a 10% tariff on U.S.-made cars, Trump will impose the same 10% tariff on that country's cars. The seemingly fair and reasonable trade relationship has now become a groundbreaking event. On April 2nd, Trump said,
"This is one of the most important days, in my opinion, American history. It's our declaration of economic independence."
For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far. But now it is our time to prosper. Trump noted that the U.S. can no longer produce enough antibiotic to treat our patients, and that almost all our computers, phones, TVs, and electronics rely on imports. He also noted that a Chinese shipyard produces more ships in a year than all U.S. shipyards combined. Therefore, Trump declared that the persistent trade deficit has evolved from an economic issue into a national emergency. Trump then announced the reciprocal tariff rates for a range of countries, with Reuters quoting White House officials saying these tariffs will take effect at midnight on April 9th. Here are the reciprocal tariff rates for key countries and regions: China 34%, European Union 20%, United Kingdom 10%, India 26%, Vietnam 46%, Taiwan 32%, Japan 24%, Thailand 36%, Cambodia 49%, Israel 17%, Sri Lanka 44%. And here are the latest response from countries. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum stated that Mexico would not impose retaliatory tariffs. Vietnam announced that it would reduce tariffs on liquefied natural gas, cars, and other products. At the same time, it proposed to lower import taxes on 10 types of goods from all World Trade Organization member countries. Thailand's Ministry of Commerce stated that it plans to reduce tariffs on U.S. products. The Israeli finance minister signed an order on April 1st to immediately cancel all remaining tariffs on U.S. imports, making Israel's tariffs on all U.S. products zero. UK Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds expressed a calm stance on Trump's decision to impose a 10% tariff on imports from the UK. He said the UK is attempting to reach an economic agreement with the US. Reynolds issued a statement after Trump's tariff announcement, saying the U.S. is our closest ally, and the government's approach is to remain calm and committed to doing this deal, which we hope will mitigate the impact of what has been announced today. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen stated that the EU seeks a negotiated solution, but Europe also has strong plans to respond by raising tariffs on the U.S. if necessary. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni called the U.S. tariffs wrong. She expressed hope for cooperation with both the U.S. and Europe to avoid a trade war that could weaken the West. China's response was the most intense. On April 3rd, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce stated that it would take strong countermeasures against the tariffs announced by Trump and urged Washington to immediately cancel the unilateral tariff measures. In recent days, some of America's trade partners have announced plans to lower their tariffs in hopes of securing exemptions from the Trump administration. Senior White House officials downplayed the possibility of other countries lowering their tariffs through negotiations, emphasizing that they view the U.S. trade situation as a national emergency. The U.S. government has made it clear that even if some countries eventually secure exemptions from the tariffs, no one will be able to avoid the 10% baseline tariff. This measure is rooted in the National Emergency Economic Powers Act, a legal framework which allows the U.S. to impose tariffs when a sustained trade deficit is deemed to constitute a national emergency. The Trump administration had previously invoked the same law to impose tariffs on Canada and Mexico, citing the fentanyl crisis as the justification. In the case of imposing tariffs on over 40 countries, Trump stated that while he harbored no ill will towards trade partners, the U.S. can no longer tolerate the unequal treatment it has faced for decades. Trump specifically pointed to China, naming General Secretary Xi Jinping. He expressed respect for China, but emphasized that the country had greatly exploited the U.S. He insinuated that China would face steep tariffs that would be difficult to evade, highlighting the ongoing trade imbalances. This statement underscores a broader strategy to force trade partners to level the playing field. Trump further addressed foreign leaders directly, urging them to lower their own tariffs if they wish the U.S. to reduce theirs. He also called on foreign manufacturers to relocate their production to the U.S. to avoid tariffs, an approach that has attracted numerous companies to establish operations in America, something unprecedented in previous decades. For years, Trump has used tariffs as a negotiating tool, seeking fairer trade policies and encouraging the repatriation of manufacturing to stimulate U.S. economic growth. The long-standing U.S. trade deficit has been exacerbated by the migration of manufacturing operations to low-cost emerging markets. This has led to significant imbalances in the domestic economy, even though the U.S. remains home to some of the world's leading technology companies. Historically, the U.S. has relied on tariffs for most of its history until the 1930s, when the shift toward free trade took hold under successive administrations. For decades, bipartisan support for free trade policies facilitated the creation of low-cost, efficient global supply chains, with U.S. companies seeking to minimize production costs by outsourcing manufacturing abroad. Notably, China's accession to the World Trade Organization in 2001, aided by the U.S., opened up global markets to Chinese goods. However, critics argue that China has violated the spirit and letter of free trade by subsidizing domestic industries and pressuring foreign companies operating in China to transfer technology. This has led to an influx of low-cost Chinese products that have severely impacted U.S. manufacturers. The consequences have been dire for American factories, many of which have shut down, leading to a steady decline in manufacturing jobs and a rise in the trade deficit. During his first term, President Trump implemented a series of new tariffs of approximately $380 billion worth of Chinese imports, aiming to invigorate U.S. industry and address unfair trade policies practiced by Beijing. These moves were part of a broader strategy to reshape global trade dynamics and to reassert U.S. economic sovereignty in the face of decades of trade imbalances. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent stated during his confirmation hearing in early January that the Trump administration would use tariffs in three situations: to correct unfair trade practices, to increase federal revenue, and as a leverage in negotiations with foreign countries to replace sanctions. Trump believes sanctions have been overused and that tariffs can actually help revive American industry. Tariff revenues will also help fill the gap in government income from the extended 2017 tax cuts. During his first term, Trump imposed several rounds of tariffs on Chinese goods, but he believes that his plans to reshape the U.S. economy were disrupted when the COVID-19 broke out in Wuhan. U.S.-China relations then fell to a low point, only starting to recover in the later stages of the Biden administration. How will the U.S. tariffs affect major countries in Asia? First, take India. In 2024, India was the 11th largest trade deficit country with the U.S. In the past, India's average tariff on U.S. goods was over 10%. However, Prime Minister Narendra Modi personally visited the U.S. recently, reaching some preliminary agreements. For the U.S., India is now the world's most populous country and is expected to become an important sales market for the U.S. For India, the U.S. is a key partner for infrastructure investment. Despite facing a 26% tariff rate in this round of reciprocal tariffs, India has much more room for negotiation compared to China. Next, let's look at Vietnam. During the previous U.S.-China trade war, Vietnam became the biggest beneficiary, serving as a transshipment point for Chinese intermediate goods. Many Chinese manufacturers even moved their operations to Vietnam to avoid tariffs. Investment in Vietnam rapidly grew in 2022, leading to the creation of a new red supply chain. As a result, Vietnam became the third largest trade deficit country with the U.S. in 2024. From the announced reciprocal tariffs, it seems that Vietnam's situation may be even more serious than India's. In addition to the concerns over China's transshipment via Vietnam, Vietnam faces a 46% tariff rate, which will force the country back to the negotiating table and could impact the rapid growth momentum Vietnam has seen in recent years. Then there's Taiwan, which is extremely important. In 2024, the U.S. had a trade deficit of $67 billion with Taiwan, making it one of the top 6 trade deficit sources for the U.S. Taiwan was also one of the targeted countries in this round of reciprocal tariffs. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, the main producer of advanced chips, holds more than 60% of the global market share. As a result, the tariff measures may lead to higher costs and short-term margin pressure on the semiconductor supply chain. While Taiwan has pricing advantages and cost-shifting abilities in semiconductor production, there will be higher cost pressures in related downstream supply chains or end products, such as servers and laptops. However, Taiwan is not without solutions. The best option would be gradually moving the production supply chain to the U.S. In the long run, this would be the most reliable solution from both an economic and geopolitical security standpoint. Finally, there's Communist China. Communist China has long been the U.S.'s greatest enemy and the holder of the largest trade deficit with the U.S. The two countries are now engaged in a full-scale confrontation. In trade, China has consistently tried to dominate markets by flooding them with large quantities of cheap goods. Since the start of Trump's first term, it became clear that Communist China is the #1 threat to the U.S. and the world today. Many observers have noted that nearly all of Trump's major policies are aimed at containing Communist China. Using tariffs to reshape America and making it great again is also about having enough power to suppress Communist China. The impacts of tariffs on China will be all-encompassing and the most severe.